Alrighty, well it is Monday, April 1st. This is not an April Fool's Day trick. We are actually gathering for our small group. We have a smaller group today than we normally have. But hopefully Nanette's able to join us at home as well. We're talking, this is our fourth week, talking about Because of This I Rejoice by Max O'Vincent. And this week was on joyful hospitality. And he starts then with a quote from Philippians. Welcome him then in the Lord with all joy and honor, such people. And he starts out by talking about in the 2nd century, the philosopher Lucian used to make fun of Christians for their outrageous hospitality. He mentions that there's a guy in jail who was pretending to be a Christian, and the Christians were going out of their way, bending over backwards to be hospitable to this man. He says, this is from Lucian's actual writing, every other form of attention was shown him, not in any casual way, but with assiduity. And from the very break of day, aged widows and orphan children could be seen waiting near the prison, while their officials even slept inside with him after bribing the guards. His satire of Christian hospitality illustrates how vital this discipline was to the early Christians. And this next sentence was so important. Hospitality helped grow the early church. Members with large houses would provide meeting space for the congregations. Early Christian missionaries relied on other Christians opening their homes in different towns. That's what Paul relied on quite a bit, not only for himself, but for his students that he would send out in his name. He was relying on the hospitality of the Christians, and they mention several spots here where it talks about hospitality in the Bible. Hebrews reminding us that stranger you're being hospitable to might actually be an angel in disguise, right? That type of thing. On the top of 73, he says, hospitality becomes one of the responsibilities of the church leaders by the time some of the latest New Testament books are written. So by the 70s and 80s, in that first century, hospitality was seen not just as something we should do, but as an actual responsibility that church leaders were supposed to go out of their way to make sure that them and their members were being hospitable. And he talks about the Didache here. The Didache was written towards the end of the first century. It was sort of a early manual for the church, kind of a policy manual, kind of a, hey, you know, when you're wondering how to do stuff, here's how to do some of this stuff, right? This is how you should do it. This is how you should set it up. And it talked about hospitality. It says in it, to welcome missionaries and traveling Christians for 2 or 3 days, and then send them on their way. Apparently, the writer believed that missionaries, like fish, begins to smell after 3 days. And we've all been there. We've all had the guests that wouldn't leave, right? We've all been in that situation. But he was encouraging them. Hey, you know, as these folks are coming through, even if you don't know them, you know, it's our duty, it's our responsibility to be hospitable to one another. And in that early church, it was important. It says here, hospitality was important since new believers were often ostracized by family members and friends. Remember, in the first couple centuries, Christianity was not its own thing yet. Christianity was a movement within the Jewish synagogue. It was a movement within the Jewish community. It was, for lack of a better term, a church split was occurring, right? There were those who wanted to keep doing Judaism like they'd always done it, and there was this newfangled group of the way, the disciples, right? The Jesus followers who were wanting to do it this way. And so it was really more of this internal matter happening. But you can see how if mom and dad are staunch believers in the Jewish synagogue, and son or daughter decides, hey, I really like this Jesus guy, and I think there's something here, and I want to go this way. You can see how that would be dividing in communities, in families, among friends. So hospitality was important. Oftentimes folks needed to stay with one another, needed somebody who was willing to reach out to them. church members, it says, became brothers and sisters in Christ. It created kind of this new social system for these outcasts, for these that have been ostracized. Paul relies, as we said earlier, on Christian hospitality. When he can't visit because he's in prison, he sends his associates. They're going to need a place to stay, right? He's not sending them with hotel fare, and they don't have a per diem, right? They're coming to town. Somebody needs to set them up in their spare bedroom. Someone needs to take them on in. He talks here that he hopes to send Timothy. He wants to visit the Philippians, but being in jail, he's not sure what the future holds. He hopes to send Timothy to them soon, but in the meantime, he's going to send back Epaphroditus. Now, Epaphroditus was somebody who came from the church in Philippi originally. He was sent by the church to Paul to communicate how things were going. He was a messenger. When he got to Paul, he stayed with Paul for a while, and he became one of Paul's disciples, one of his students. And now, in this instance, Paul thinks he's going to send Epaphroditus back to them. They know Epaphroditus. He's from their church, right? So they already know him, right? But also Paul's sending him back to be an example, to be a representative. When Paul sent somebody out to the churches, he did so, he would often phrase it as, I'm sending them to you in the Lord, in Christ Jesus. He would often, you've been reading through one of Paul's letters, you'll see him stop and be like, Timothy, my brother from another mother who has been through the mud with me, we think of the same, right? He would just build them up, and he would talk about how great they are. He was doing that so that the church that was receiving them would be like, oh, listen to this guy, sounds pretty good. He's coming to see us. Okay, I liked it later in the chapter he talked about, so they didn't think that Timothy was an enforcer sent by Paul to slap people around and get them in line, right? But then he was, hey, I can't come to you right now, but this guy's just as good. This guy, we think alike, we talk alike, right? He's in Christ, I'm in Christ. I'm sending you to him in that same manner. And it goes on here. He wants the Philippians to receive them joyfully as an expression of the Christian hospitality that helps spread the gospel. And then he goes on here to talk about Timothy. He introduces Timothy at the beginning of the letter as his fellow slave in Christ Jesus. He reminds the Philippians of the deep connection. Timothy was with Paul when he founded the church in Philippi. So again, they know Timothy. They've met him before. But more than that, even though they already know his character and Paul doesn't need to recommend him, they may not realize that Timothy exemplifies the very type of self-denying humility Paul has just exhorted them to offer to one another. He describes Timothy as one who puts the interests of Christ above his own interest. In sending Timothy to them, Paul gives a living example of the type of service he hopes to fill. So he's sending them an example, right? Timothy wasn't coming for 2 or 3 days. Timothy was probably going to spend 2 or 3 months with them, right? As he came to stay with them, it was going to be over time. Paul was sending them a role model. Paul was sending them an example. I don't just want you to listen to this guy and rely on this guy. I want you to watch this guy. See how he does it. Because I want you to do it that way, right? He's doing it like I would do it. I mean, that's how much Paul trusts Timothy and Epaphroditus. Which, by the way, is a great name. If you have any family or friends who are having a baby and they're struggling on a good name for a boy, Epaphroditus is going to get you noticed in class. That's going to, when the teacher has to call on you, yes, Epaphroditus. Yes, that's...
Probably wouldn't call on him.
Or they'd call him Epi, Epi,
He could slide through unnoticed.
Absolutely. But Paul's sending him, he uses the phrase, sending him to them in the Lord Jesus. He wants the Philippians to receive Timothy in that way. This isn't just a guy. This isn't just some other person coming to teach and preach. This isn't just run-of-the-mill stuff. You need to receive this guy as though the Lord has sent him. You need to receive him in the Lord, you should be happy that he's there. Don't be mad that he's there. Don't be frustrated. Don't be suspicious. Be happy and joyful that he's come to be among you. Rather than being a burden, Timothy's visit is a further sharing in Christian ministry. In the early church, welcoming a Christian brother or sister is akin to welcoming Christ. It goes back to the idea of Abraham in the Old Testament when Abraham, the two strangers came by, and Abraham invited them in for dinner, and realized that they were heading to Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy them. And well, what if we find 15 good people? Okay, we'll spare them. Well, what if we find 10? Well, what if we find 7? What if we find 5? Because those were angels that were on the way to destroy the cities. The writer of Hebrews talking about extending hospitality, because some have entertained. That's the phone, not the door. Have entertained angels unknowingly. And Jesus, of course, the refrain from Matthew 25, whatever you do unto the least of these, you do it unto me. It kind of goes back to that earlier chapter that talked about joyful prayer. We talked about that monk who always believed that every job he was given, no matter how menial it was, he did it as if he believed God's presence was in the room with him. He's like, I'm not doing this job for you guys. God's standing right there. God's watching. It's kind of that same idea here. That when you show that type of hospitality, you're showing that hospitality. He tells the story here of Martin of Tours. Martin of Tours was still a catechumen. Bonus points if anybody knows what a catechumen is. Catechumen. What's it sound like? Sounds like that. It sounds like there's a Catholic phrase, catechism. Right? Catechumen is, in the early church, it was a believer who had come into the way with Jesus but had not been baptized yet. Typically they did most of their baptisms around Easter. So it's a believer who hasn't reached baptism yet. So Martin of Tours was a believer, and he was serving in the Roman army, encounters a beggar lying by the city wall, tears his cloak in half and gives the beggar half of it. That night he goes home. He has a dream of Jesus walking around heaven wearing half the cloak. And when the people in heaven go, Jesus, why don't you take off that cloak? He says, because my friend Martin gave this to me. And it's that idea that when we show hospitality to one another, there's a famous story that when Mother Teresa was working with her nuns on the streets of Calcutta in India, she would tell them, when you're holding a dying person in your arms and you look into their eyes, it's the eyes of Jesus staring back. Is how she trained them to offer such mercy in such horrible conditions. Was that you're doing this for Jesus, is who you're doing it for. John Wesley wrote a sermon based on the parable in Matthew 25 entitled On Visiting the Sick. And it was at this moment I realized that the author is a Methodist. Because this is like the third time he's brought up John Wesley. And I'm like, why is he talking about Wesley so much? He's a Methodist. John Wesley founded the Methodist Church. I'm like, okay, all right, that makes sense now. But John Wesley wrote a sermon where he calls acts of mercy a means of grace, which means a place and act where we expect to encounter God. When I first read Wesley's premise, it turned my understanding of mission work upside down. For years, I had engaged in acts of mercy with the attitude that Christians need to supply others out of our abundance. However, Wesley says that acts of mercy, like visiting the sick or those in prison, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sanctify us. Rather than carrying out these practices as though we have all the faith and resources and others are just fortunate to benefit from our excess, Wesley encourages us to do these works of mercy expecting to encounter Christ in those whom we serve. He talks about how often in these acts of service, these acts of mercy, people who engage in them will come out and say, I got more out of that than what I gave. Right? I think about the times that we feed down at the Johnson County Food Ministry, or help at the Christmas Bureau, or take the food boxes to kids in the summertime, right? I mean, I know Alan, when Alan delivers those boxes of food, he's smiling all day. That's just his favorite Saturday, to get to go deliver boxes of food to kids. And just for the rest of the day, he's in a good mood. And if you want to ask Alan for a favor, the Saturday afternoon after he delivers food boxes is when to hit him up. He is a softie in those moments. But how many times have we served in ways and we come out of it feeling like, man, I was helping them, but I'm the one that benefited from this. I mean, wow,
When I do Meals on Wheels, the food I give them.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. Oh yeah.
uplifting.
Yeah, you get done and you just feel, you're just like, oh, I feel great. I just
Yeah.
feel good that I helped people. Absolutely. What he's saying here is that Wesley's idea was that we don't do acts of mercy to sanctify them. We do acts of mercy to sanctify us, to set us free, right? To cleanse our spirits. We do this. This helps us when we do it. There's a great billboard. I drive through the downtown every day coming to work, and there's a billboard for Catholic Charities. And it says on it, we don't serve people because they're Catholic, we serve people because we are. And I was like, that's a neat, I was like, you could easily, we don't serve people because they're Christians, we serve people because we are. I mean, that's kind of the idea the author's getting at there. We talk a little about Epaphroditus now. My favorite name for a newborn ever. I'm gonna convince somebody in my life to name their kid Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was their messenger to Paul. He'd spent some time with Paul. He'd been sick. Philippians had heard about that. They'd been a little worried about him. Epaphroditus had been a little anxious because he didn't want his friends and family to be worrying about him back there. He wanted to go back, let them know he was okay. But here on 78, it says, Paul expects the Philippians to welcome Epaphroditus joyfully. More than a friend returned from a long journey or recovered from serious illness. Paul describes Epaphroditus' ministry as a priestly sacrifice, which recalls Paul's libation and his calls for the Philippians to live sacrificially. So once again, even Epaphroditus is being sent back as an example, right? This guy gets it. Watch him. Listen to him. I trust him. You can follow him. He should be welcomed back joyfully and as a hero of the faith, not because of what he did for Paul, but because of how he was willing to give of himself to the point of death for Christ. Paul affirms Epaphroditus' status as Paul's brother, his fellow laborer in the gospel, and a soldier who has stood his post. Therefore, Philippians can welcome him with full joy. And he talks here about how his congregation every August hosts some young people getting ready to enter the mission field. And he said, we kind of always felt like we were giving them a place to come, look at what we're doing for them. We're opening our church up. But he said, at first we thought we were being nice and giving them a place to speak. But after extending hospitality, we found ourselves called to new expressions of joyful ministry and to rejoice in the work God is doing around the world. Every time we have the opportunity to extend hospitality and to share in someone else's faith journey, to hear where they're at, to hear their story, it's uplifting to us. It's inspiring to us. It's an opportunity for that fellowship we talked about in an earlier chapter. That opportunity for us to hear how God is moving in their life, to discover those ways. I know that any time we've had the opportunity, we had in January the young lady that was a missionary in Mexico came to speak, and the opportunity to hear her speak was wonderful. To hear the stories of the young girls she worked with, and one of them she helped get. It was the first time the girl was the first child, was the first person in her family to finish high school and to go to college. And to go to college was not an easy thing. The college was hours away. In Mexico, you have to take a test. They don't have like a standard test, like an SAT. Each college has its own test. And you have to take the test, and if you don't pass it, you have to wait a year to take it again. So she had taken the test for the college that was closest to their home, that was right in the same city, and she didn't pass it. And she was all distraught. Oh, I'm not going to get a chance to go to college. I'm going to just have to go to work, and in a year, who knows what will happen, And so they helped her apply to another college, but this college was a 2-day bus ride away. This girl had never left the state they were in. I mean, it'd be like somebody living here and never leaving Kansas, right? And all of a sudden they get the opportunity to go to school in California. And it's a great opportunity, but how am I going to get there? How am I going to pay for stuff? So they applied for scholarships, and she ended up getting 4 scholarships, and each scholarship addressed a need that got that girl to college. One was a scholarship just for transportation, so she could use it for her bus tickets to get there and to get home again at the end of the year. I mean, but they said it all just kind of fell into place. To hear the story, though, to hear her describe it, you're just sitting there and you're just smiling, right? You're like, oh, that's awesome. It's just a good story. When we extend hospitality, we get the opportunity to hear other people's story, to what he says, to rejoice in the work God is doing around the world. So he goes on to talk here about joyful hospitality as a discipline, not as something that haphazardly happens, not as something that we fall backwards into, but as something we purposely do as a practice of our faith. A discipline means that we're practicing it, we're working on it, we're doing it regularly, we're putting it into our daily life. The expectation of encountering God in joyful hospitality fueled the early church in living out this discipline, and it helped the joyous spread of the gospel. In the early church, them having hospitality for one another was huge, and in an age where, filth and disease were a common everyday thing, and in a world where 70% of children didn't make it past 2 or 3, in a world that is that devastating, to have a group of people that love one another and care for one another and will actually open up their homes, their resources, their talents, their gifts to one another. The early philosopher that made fun of us for it tells you how strange it was in that environment. This was not something people did normally. But this funny little group off here on the side, we're taking care of one another, we're supporting one another, we're helping one another, and it was noticed. People notice that. People notice when you are hospitable, when you are joyfully hospitable, when you open yourself or your home or your resources or your time. People notice that. Yet, he says, for some of us, hospitality may evoke ideas of rigid etiquette rules and guests who never leave. Hospitality can seem more like a test of our patience than a practice of growing closer to God. He talks about how for a lot of the churches he served, he would do spiritual gifts assessments. And because he was teaching the class, he would often take it each time himself. And it was fairly, he usually got the results he expected. He'd taken it so many times. He said there's top 3 areas were usually his top 3 areas. They might be a different order. Maybe it was 1, 2, 3. Maybe it was 2, 3, 1. Sometimes it's a different order. But hospitality was always dead last. There was never hospitality was at the bottom.
To me.
It's the way those tests work. They ask, essentially about 100 questions. It's really only about 10 questions. They're just asking them 10 different ways. And so it kind of assesses how you feel about these areas. And so, he describes later that by going through this, he and his wife realized they were introverts. That probably has a lot to do with it. Being introverted, and it's important that we define that term, an introvert is not a shy person. They can be, but it's not guaranteed. I have a brother-in-law who is an extrovert, but he's a shy extrovert. And the difference is introverts recharge or rest and rejuvenate best in alone time, when they're given time to be with themselves. Extroverts recharge or rejuvenate best when they're with other people. My brother-in-law loves to be with other people. He can be in the house for an hour and not say 2 words, right? He's not a talky guy. His kids won't shut up. I think they're just filling the dead space because he doesn't talk at all. But he's extroverted. He's kind of shy. I've known outgoing introverts, but they need that downtime to recharge. And that's what he and his wife kind of realized. The reason we're not good at hospitality is it was draining us. It was a burden on us because we do best in one-on-one time. But I thought that was interesting too. It might explain why this chapter was so short. I think it was only like 9 pages, 10 pages. It was a short chapter. But I think it's an important topic. He said we learned at the bottom of 81, we learned 2 things. First, we're both introverts. Second, while we enjoy visiting with people in our home, we will both wear ourselves out cleaning to prepare for guests. Been there, right? Yeah. Growing up, I had 2 grandmothers. I had my grandma Helen, who was Dixie's cousin, and I had my grandma Jean, who was my mom's mom. Grandma Helen lived in the same town we did. She would come by all the time. We didn't have to clean the house for Grandma Helen. She didn't care. If Grandma Jean was coming, Mark had to clean his room. Now, I don't know why. Grandma Jean never went in my room the whole time I was growing up. But
But
my
in
mom
case
would
she did.
Mom would come in and say, "You got to clean this room. I need to be able to see the floor. I forgot what color the carpet is. We need to get all this stuff off
Maybe
the
it
floor."
had nothing to do with that, Gene.
I don't think it did. I don't think it did at all.
Jean.
I think Grandma Jean.
Grandma Jean didn't come
I
too
think it was a
often.
con job.
It
My
was a
mom would just
good
get me to clean my
excuse.
room. But we've all been there, right? You have guests coming over, all of a
Sure.
sudden you look around and you're like, oh, we should tidy up a little bit. There is something to that. Hospitality takes work. It does take effort. At the same time, when it's truly offered joyfully, I mean, we've all been received in someone's home, right? We've all been there where somebody just opens their home to us, and what's mine is yours. Mi casa, su casa, and you just feel like, wow, this is great. This is amazing. I mean, it's just this uplifting feeling. But it does take work. It does, even for extroverts. It does. Hospitality is work. We have to purposely do it. We have to be mindful of it. He says here towards the end on 82, the visits with those who serve in different ministry contexts have been our real lessons in Christian hospitality. These visits fill us with such joy that we forget about dust and cobwebs and lose track of time. When we extend the true hospitality of visits with our sisters and brothers in our home, we experience the joy of the Lord's presence. Hospitality is more than extending a welcome, a place to stay, or a meal to someone. Hospitality is a way to share with fellow Christians and to hear about the work of God in places and lives that may not be part of our normal pathways. Hospitality expands our world and helps us grow in our knowledge and love of God and neighbor. On Sunday when we were talking, Jackie Watts mentioned she grew up in near St. Joe and went to a small rural church. And she said any Sunday that they had visitors, when the visitors came in, immediately some of the folks in the church go over to the side and have a conversation about who is going to invite them to lunch. Somebody needs to take them to lunch today. Who's it going to be? Okay, well, we just did it. Well, I can't do it today. I got to go see my brother. Okay, we'll do it. We'll take them out to lunch. And then they would go back in and, hey, how you doing? Hey, would you like to go to lunch after church? And it was this hospitality they would extend to folks. Acts like that are important. When we open our doors to let the Christmas Bureau or the regional church or the bus company or the Cub Scouts or the Boy Scouts or any of those groups, we open our doors to let those folks in. It's a hospitality that shows them that this is a place you can come to. This is a place that you're welcome in. This is a place, we want you to be here. How can we help? It touches people. It changes people. I've mentioned before when the bus drivers come in, they see that we're raising money to buy Christmas gifts for kids at the elementary school, and the bus drivers are like, those are our kids, and they want to give money to it. That's that happened because we say, yeah, you can come in and do your safety meetings here once a month. What a simple thing. They get to use an empty room that we weren't using anyway, and yet you touch somebody's life. You change somebody's life with it. Hospitality is that way. Can you think of a time in your life when you have encountered, let's call it radical hospitality, where somebody just went above and beyond to be hospitable to you? It doesn't necessarily be around church, but just in life in general.
I can. We were coming home from Branson pulling a travel trailer. The girls were probably maybe 8 and 10. We pulled off of I-44 to come across to Carthage, that road across there. The trailer hitch broke and the tire went out and we were stranded, so to speak. And there was a farmhouse up the road, maybe a half a mile. You could see it, but so Glenn walked up there and I stayed back with the girls, and they invited us in. This was about 10 in the morning. We spent the whole day there. They fed us lunch. They didn't want us to leave till we had dinner, but they had fixed the trailer and fixed the tires, so we headed on home.
Oh, it's amazing.
Now that's truly
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. We still kept in touch with them for years.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's
just
wonderful.
out of the blue.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Radical hospitality.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He had the tools there and the farmer, and they worked to fix it.
Can you think of any time somebody?
Oh, I
Whether
know
it was
it's happened a lot, but to come up with that one time.
Yeah,
You
no.
think
No, I'm thinking.
What does it mean for you to do works of mercy, like visiting the sick or feeding the hungry, as if you were doing them in service to Christ? What does it mean when we do those things? When we do the Meals on Wheels, or visit somebody in the hospital, or oh gosh, when we feed kids at the school? What do you think that means to the folks participating in that, or when you have participated in it?
means you're doing Christ's work, I think.
Doing Christ's work,
It's
yeah.
a lot kind of like the humility thing last week, which I missed, but I think that's one reason we're put on this earth, is to help other people, even if they're hurting, and even if they're not hurting, to help other people and to build other people up.
Absolutely.
Make them feel good, regardless of who they are, or if they're in need or if they're not in need. Building people up, I think, is what we're here and work to do.
Yeah.
So I kind of like I enjoy doing that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things I was thinking about, we talked about hospitality, I talked here a lot, and I think, generally, I think of hospitality as somebody's coming to you and you're sharing your house, you're sharing your meal, you're sharing stuff with them. What about, is it still hospitality? What about going out? Like, we go to the Christian ministry to feed people. We're going out. They're not coming into us and we're saying, okay, you can share whatever we have. We're actually taking that out. Is that hospitality?
Oh,
or
yeah,
is that considered
yeah.
service?
No, very much. I mean, that falls in line with what he talked about with Wesley's sermon. Those acts of mercy, when we visit the sick, when we feed the hungry, when we clothe the poor, when we do those things, those acts of mercy are that hospitality. I mean, it's still sharing our resource or sharing our blessings with someone else. I mean, it's not necessarily sharing the blessing of our home or in this case our building. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's hospitality.
One of the stories and I've shared it before, that's made an impact on my life with Gene Amos. And Margaret told me one time about this vagrant. I don't know, apparently must have been hanging around their neighborhood or something, and Gene would take out food and feed him. And Margaret says, why do you keep the guy just hanging around here? He knows we're an easy touch. Why do you keep feeding him? Kind of like a cat, you know?
Right.
And Gene said, you never know, that might be Jesus. And I might be feeding Jesus, you know, or an angel, like they talked about.
Absolutely.
In the deal here, and that I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I think about that. You know, Gene Amos.
Yeah. You know, there was years ago, back before he went to Congress, Emmanuel Cleaver was a pastor at St. James United Methodist Church, and they had a break-in. Part of the church was open and accessible 24 hours a day for prayer. I think it was a chapel or something like that. Somehow people had used that access to be able to get in further, and they'd stolen some computers and stuff. And so the church board was having the elders were having a conversation about, well, we need to lock the whole building up, and Reverend Cleaver reminded him. He said, he goes, it's on us to be hospitable. He goes, what they did was on them. He said, but our community needs this. He goes, it's on us to still be hospitable even when we've been hurt by it. He said, it's on us to be open and welcoming. He said, he goes, yeah, some people will take advantage of it. Yes. But man, if we help one person with it, isn't it worth it? That we help that one, I often think about, there's times where you're helping folks and you feel like, is this the best use of our resource? But man, you get one person that you help, and you realize that was the one. That's why I was doing all this, was that one right there. This past Saturday, we participated in a mobile food pantry from Harvesters at Marion Park Elementary. Our volunteers had to be there very early, like 6 in the morning. It was snowing. I understand that. But they were handing out, it was an opportunity. What this is a program through Harvesters to disseminate some fresh items. They had blueberries, they had apples, they had some coleslaw that was packaged coleslaw. They were handing stuff out, and they had instructions to give each car that came by a box of blueberries, and the box had like 6 containers of blueberries in it. And a car pulled up, and Pam Boyd handed them the box, and the little girl sitting in the passenger seat, she's like, "What are these?" And Pam goes, "They're blueberries." And the little girl goes, "I love blueberries!" And Pam turned around and grabbed, they had 2 pallets of them. Pam grabbed 2 more boxes and passed them in the car, and she's like, "You enjoy those." So she was absolutely. They had so many left over. They took some to Shawnee Community Services. They brought some here. Sunday morning they were handing out blueberries.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I missed.
Oh, we missed out.
No blueberries. That's right. You missed the blueberries. But you know that one guy. They were cold. They were tired. They were wet.
Dark.
It was dark when they started out there, and yet that when Pam told the story, that what she started with was that little girl. That was the story that touched her. She was like, oh, she was so excited to get blueberries, and that's why we do that. It's that one person. Yeah, 9 people might take advantage of it or might not receive it in the way that we would tell them to receive it. Man, that one person that gets it and goes, "Thank you." That's. I think back years ago we used to do the kindness bus where we'd go around and do random acts of kindness in the community. And we had, I got to think of his name, Connie Nikias Hill's son. I can see him in my head. He was maybe 18 or 19. He went on one of the buses with it, which I was kind of surprised. He didn't come to church a lot, but he wanted to go on the bus and do acts of kindness. I'm like, sure. And we stopped at Quick Trip to hand out little $5 gift gas cards. $5. That's not even a quarter tank. That's but it's just it's a nice thing. Hey, how you doing? Have $5 on us. He walked up to this guy who was standing at the gas tank, and Chris, that was his name, Chris. Yeah. Chris walks up to him. He's like, "Hey, I'm from Miriam Christian Church, and we're just doing random acts of kindness. And would you like a $5 gas card?" And the guy he handed it to, tears started rolling down his cheeks. He'd been standing at the gas pump. His truck's on empty. He has to drive across the city to Belton to get his kid. He's divorced, and it's his weekend to have his kid. And he's trying to go get his kid, and he's standing there with no money in his pockets, his gas tank on empty, thinking, "How am I going to put gas in my truck?" And this 18-year-old kid comes walking up, and is like, "Here's $5," And it was just, it broke this guy's heart. He was so moved. And I remember Chris, I didn't see this happen. I was doing my own things. We get back on the bus. Chris gets back on the bus. I don't think his feet were even touching the floor. He was just you could just see how elated he was at this experience. That man, this guy broke down crying. What a simple thing. Just a simple act of mercy of, "Hey man, you need $5. And it changed that guy's world for the day. That day was different because of Chris. And Chris was just blown away by how that made him feel. Yeah, he was changed. That moment, I'll bet if you ask Chris today, and that's been 10 years ago, I'll bet he remembers that. I'll bet he could tell you, "Oh yeah, right over there at the Quick Trip, right?" He'd tell you where it was at, which pump it was on. That's what hospitality does for us.
I think sometimes we get hung up on people take advantage of it.
Sure.
There are people out there
They're going to,
how
sure.
they live. They
Yeah.
take advantage of your
There are
hospitality.
No, absolutely.
And I figured, that's on them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm still doing
100%.
I'm doing my thing that God wants me to do by extending hospitality, being nice to people, and if they take advantage of it, they're the ones that have to answer.
Yeah,
for
that's on them.
That's their
Because
sorrow,
because
not
again,
yours.
that one person that you finally do it for, and they're like,
Mhm.
"This was what I needed." That's when you're like, "Yes!" That's
When
what I do it for.
I worked at Truman Medical Center, and we would go, there's a overpass that connects Truman and Children's, and we would always go eat at Children's because they had better food. And I worked with this.
Know all the secrets.
Yeah. I worked with this younger gal, was one of the people I worked with, and we'd go over for meal. There'd be 2 or 3 or 4 of us, and I'd get in line and she'd get in line, and I don't know, for some reason I always had this thing about I ought to offer to pay for people, and it wasn't anything Christian at that time, but I'd say, "Oh, I'll get hers," and some of the other people at work said, "Why do you do that? Belinda's just taking advantage of you." And that's when, and then I thought, when they started asking, I thought, that's on her. I'm doing a nice thing. I'm being nice to her, and she was an okay person. I'm being nice to her, and that's up to her to answer for that.
Absolutely.
I'm doing, and I think we get hung up on that though, that, hey, I'm not gonna help those people, cause they're just taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
You know, I tell you, one of the things, right, today, these people standing on the street corners, I wanna help those people, but I'm a firm believer that most of those people, that's a job, and they don't even own that corner. They're out there collecting money, and somebody else gets the money and gives them a percentage. I really believe that is the case, and I won't help them, and I really shouldn't, and I always feel kinda guilty about, well, I should do it, but, I
You know what I carry in my car?
Yeah.
I carry a box of socks. Brand new socks,
Mhm.
folded into pairs. Anytime I see the guys with the signs, I roll the window down, I hand them a pair of socks. Sometimes I might end up with some granola bars, I'll stick a granola bar in it. I'll hand that to them and I'll say, man, good luck, stay warm. And they're
What's the
always
reaction?
appreciative. They're always appreciative of it. Oftentimes they're very appreciative, especially when it's cold. They're very happy to get another pair of socks. But regardless of the situation, it's what I'm willing to do to say, man, I can give you this. This is what I have.
yeah.
And they're always say thank you. They're always like, thanks, I appreciate it. You know, they'll be like, is there something in there? And I'm like, it's a granola bar. Hey, all right, get a granola bar. But yeah, I don't give them money. Oftentimes I may not have it, or the worry about, well, what am I giving them money for?
Right.
Where's it going to end
Yeah,
up?
that's
Is it,
what-
you know?
Yeah,
Insurance
that's,
But by giving them socks, I'm showing them that, hey, man, I care about you. You know, and there is something to, you know, if you've ever been in a situation where you couldn't clean up for a while, for some days, putting on a fresh, clean pair of socks sometimes is one of the most amazing feelings in the world. I mean, it just feels like, oh, that's better. And so that's why, you know, I hand them a fresh, brand new pair of socks. There you go, man.
yeah.
And they always take it. They're always appreciative. And I don't get caught then in the idea of, well, if I give them money, what kind of money should I give them? But it's a way I can still roll down my window and I can see them, right? And I can say, because you're right, some of them probably are doing it and making good money at it.
Yeah.
Some of them are probably doing it and don't need it. But man, if there's one of them who actually is homeless,
That's
living under the
great.
bridge, a clean, dry pair of socks is like gold. So I feel like that one time I'm gonna hit it right, it's a victory, and the rest of them just got a clean
Yeah.
pair of socks out of me.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
you can order socks pretty cheap on the internet. So you know, I get
even when I see them out there in the snow and the cold, and think that's a job, but they just
Yeah.
make money. Even
Sometimes.
still, standing out there in the cold.
Yeah, yeah.
For $1.
But again, just like you said, that's on them. You know, when I
Yeah,
choose to
that's
help,
it.
that's on
Right.
me. That's me acting out my faith. And hey, here's how I can help. This is what I can give.
Yeah.
I'll tell you
Um,
what Glenn did the other day. He went to Quick Trip to fill up some gas. He goes over in Missouri because he goes to the jewelry store over there. And this lady drove up, and he said as she drove up, the car went clunk, clunk, you know, like it just barely made it. And he was on one side, and she was on the other. And she got out, and she looked at him, and he put the nozzle back, and he was ready to leave. And she said, "Sir, could you help me?" And Glenn said, "What do you need?" And she said, "I have 5 cents, and that's all I have to get home. I just went to visit my sister who's I think in hospice care over there on Warnell, because he was on Warnell, and he just turned around, filled her tank up."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
She said, "Well, here I have a bag of grits," and Glenn doesn't like grits.
Seems like a fair trade. A
Yeah.
tank of gas for a bag of grits.
No,
That's about
no.
fair. That's about even. Yeah. Yeah.
No
Absolutely.
grits, no grits.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, no, I think, you know, when it comes to the church, I think those things are just so important. I think you're right. Sometimes we get caught up in people are taking advantage. I think sometimes we get caught up in, I don't want to share because we don't have much, right?
Yeah.
All I have is this, so I'm just going to hold on to it. I don't want to share it with anybody. And I think in the church, it's really hard to break that mindset sometimes, to say, yeah, we don't have much, but what we have, we're going to offer.
Yeah.
And again, that's on us, right? If you know,
Sometimes it
that's on
comes
us to
back
act out our
twofold.
faith that way. You know, conversations we have about who can use the church and who can who can be. We've come a long ways in the last decade of opening our doors and saying, "Come on in. Let's how can we help you with this resource? There's a wonderful resource we have. How can we put it to use?" Because 10 years ago, this building was dark and empty, 5-6 days a week.
Oh.
And now we've got
Just look
groups
today,
in here.
how many people
Oh,
are
yeah.
here today?
There was the
day.
bus company was here today doing special training with I think it's with their assistants that
Is that
sit
what
on the
it
bus, not the drivers.
Assistants.
But they had training going all day down the fellowship hall. We had the global ministry representative for Ghana was here doing some work. The regional office was, of course, here doing some work. We had a meeting of the executive committee of the regional church to discuss some issues. We had a finance meeting to talk about our own issues.
Right.
Alice Goff came in so that we could register her grandchild for camp. Just all this life that's
Lot
going on. I think that's just so important to open our doors and say, we don't have much. If we're being honest, we don't. We had a finance meeting today. We don't have much. But what we have, we're willing to share. Come in and let's see what we can do. I think that's so important to the community. That's.
I think it's important to us that we
Absolutely
this building sits here.
Yeah.
One thing that still bothers me a little bit is those bells are laying up there in that closet.
I need to stop the recording if we're going to talk about the bells because this is public. No, yes, the bells are a perfect example of a resource that some people would rather have sit locked up in a corner than find a use for. And I understand they're expensive, and I understand that people collected the money to give them, but I guess my approach always is it's not our house, it's God's house. They're not our bells, they're God's bells. They're meant to bring glory to God. And if there's another idea we can find that would accomplish that, woohoo, that's a victory. That's a victory for us.
Somebody else gets some use out of it.
Yeah. That's always how can we share our resources?
We have other things.
We
have other resources that we could be sharing.
Well, years ago, before we opened up our church as much as we do now, I had a conversation with somebody. We had been contacted by a family in the community that wanted to have their daughter's quinceañera here. A quinceañera is the 15th birthday of a girl in a Hispanic family, is a big party. Traditionally, it was a time of becoming a woman, right? That's when you moved into womanhood. But it's a big formal party. They have dresses. The boys are in tuxedos. It's almost prom-like in its extravagance and splendor. But it's a big party. All the family and friends come. There's lots of good food. There's music and dancing, and woo, they're 15. It's basically a big birthday party. The person I was talking to, this has probably been 7 or 8 years ago. She'd been the one that taken the call, and she told him no. And I said, "Why did you tell him no?" "Well, I don't know what a quinceañera is." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "Well," so I explained to her, it's a birthday party. She goes, "Well, they wanted to have music and dancing."
So?
And I said, "Are we against dancing?" I said, "When did that happen?" I said, "I didn't realize we were against dancing." She goes, "Well, we're not against it, but she goes, they could shake the building." And I was like, how many people were they bringing? It was an opportunity. There's so many opportunities we have to be hospitable. And it really doesn't cost us. All the times I've heard the arguments about, well, the lights have to be on, the heat has to be on. Yeah, but in a lot of cases, the lights were already on anyway. The heat was already on. And when you figure out what light bulbs cost, it's pennies on the dollar that we're, that we get the opportunity to be hospitable and say, come in and be with us.
And there's times when, I've been a little short of cash here and there, and I've given, even still, and I struggle with it, then I gave money to a charity of some sort, and it several times I've done that, and it just seems like then at the end of the month, I end up with more money.
Comes back around.
I don't know where it came from, but I end up with more money at the end of the month than I had the previous month when I didn't give anything away. And I'm thinking that, the more we give, the more the Lord will give us. And if we're sharing our stuff, sharing our building, sharing our things, I think the Lord will actually end up with more
Absolutely.
We would if we did this.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. Yeah. I've had those same moments in my life where you're sitting in church, you got your last $20, and you're like, okay. When you're dropping the plate, and at the end of the month, you're like, well, where'd that $80 come from? Yeah. What happened? How did?
Didn't
Yeah.
you
It's
preach
amazing.
that to your brother?
Uh,
Sometime?
it wasn't my brother; it was my cousin.
Oh.
Yeah.
'Cause
I've
told
had
the
times when
story.
I give.
Yeah, no, we had Chad and I had an argument one
Oh,
time. But
okay.
he had that opinion. We were trying to, instead of doing Christmas one year, my dad's family wanted to. We were going to put all the money we would have spent on Christmas gifts together, and we were going to go buy gifts for, like when they have those like angel trees where you can go buy gifts for the kids. We were going to spend all the money on that instead. We were just going to get together and eat and have fun. That's what we like to do anyway. And my cousin had a problem with that because some of those people are on welfare and they smoke cigarettes and drive motorcycles. And my argument to him at the time was the same thing. I was like, it's not on us how they behave.
Right.
What's on us is that we're generous, is that we're faithful. I can't control what they do. Well, I'm not giving my money then. I was like, oh, then don't give your money. Because we're going to give our money. So
It's amazing how many times that I've had
Have you got that
insurance.
still on?
yeah,
No.
he doesn't watch it.
I've had insurance, like I got a refund from.
Chad, if you're watching, I still hold that against you.
When I've had an insurance premium, I remember one time of $80 showed up, and I was like, how am I going to get through the month here? And $80 showed up, and a check and it was like an insurance premium refund. I'm like, where that came from? But I've had that happen many times where money will appear, and
God works in mysterious
Oh, yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
We got a refund, didn't we? $23.
We did.
We got an insurance refund. $23.
$23.
We're gonna build a whole new wing on the church with that. We're so excited.
We can buy some new light bulbs.
That's right. That's right. Indeed. Well, good. Well, this was a good chapter. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast. Next week we'll be coming. Now, next week we will have a guest teacher. Alan Watts is going to be here. I'm going to be out of town. He's going to be teaching the class on Monday night.
Okay.
And on Sunday for me. Alan has been taking each week's lesson and breaking it down into a summary and sending it out to his shepherds, to the people on his shepherding list.
Wow.
He's been doing such a good job with it that he offered to lead the class next week. So we're going to be reading week 5, Joyful Asceticism.
What is it? What is it he's going to be talking about? Asceticism?
Asceticism.
I'll have to practice saying it.
Let me see here.
Don't hold your tongue.
Asceticism, spiritual disciplines. Let me look here. I don't know. I use the word asceticism here
extreme
not to
fasting.
identify extreme spiritual practices, but
Right.
rather in the sense of its Greek root. The Greek verb askein means to practice, to exercise, to work.
Physical.
Well, here on the first
Well,
page it
or our spirits, right?
Right.
Working out our
Work
spirits.
with our
So
says, here on the first page it says the wearing of uncomfortable hair shirts.
there you go. Self-flagellation,
I'll be
things like
interested to see
that.
what
Alrighty,
Alan-
we're going to go ahead and stop the broadcast.